What would you do if your homeowners association became so petty and controlling that they made your life a living nightmare? Most people would just grin and bear it, maybe move away. But me? I decided to buy every single house in the neighborhood just to shut them down. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how I did it. My name is David, and 3 years ago, I thought I was living the American dream. I had just bought my first house in Sunset Meadows, a beautiful planned community with tree-lined streets, perfectly manicured lawns, and what I thought was a reasonable HOA. The monthly fees were only $150, and the community looked pristine. What could go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything. It started small, as these things always do. 2 weeks after moving in, I got my first violation notice. Apparently, my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Not black enough, according to Mrs. Henderson, the HOA president. It needed to be midnight eclipse black, not standard black. I had to repaint a perfectly good mailbox because it was literally one shade lighter than what was acceptable. I laughed it off. Every neighborhood has that one person, right? But Mrs. Henderson wasn't alone. She had her little army of retirees with nothing better to do than patrol the streets looking for violations. There was Bob Martinez, the vice president, who carried a measuring tape everywhere to make sure no one's grass was taller than exactly 2 3/4 inches. Then there was Susan Kim, the secretary, who took photos of every house daily and compared them to the previous day's photos to spot any unauthorized changes. The violations started coming weekly. My garden hose was visible from the street. Violation. I had a small wreath on my door in July. Violation seasonal. Decorations only allowed from December 1st to January 15th. I parked my car in my own driveway, but it was 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. Violation. Each violation came with a $50 fine. But the final straw came 6 months after I moved in. I had been working 16-hour days on a big project at work, and honestly, I let my yard slide a little. The grass was maybe half an inch longer than it should have been, and there were a few weeds in the flower bed. I came home exhausted on a Friday night, planning to take care of it over the weekend. Instead, I found a crew of landscapers in my yard at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. They were mowing my lawn, pulling weeds, and trimming bushes. I ran outside in my pajamas, asking what the hell they were doing. Emergency landscaping, one of them said, showing me a work order. The HOA hired us. I called Mrs. Henderson immediately. She answered on the first ring, like she was waiting for my call. "Oh, David," she said in that sickeningly sweet voice. "Your property was in violation for over 72 hours. According to Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws, we have the right to hire contractors to fix violations and bill the homeowner. The landscaping cost $400, plus a $200 emergency fee, plus the original $50 violation fee. You'll see it on your next HOA statement. $650 for lawn care that I was planning to do myself for free. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to move. I wasn't going to just deal with it. I was going to destroy this HOA from the inside out. But I'm not stupid. I couldn't just storm into the next board meeting and demand changes. These people had been running this neighborhood like their personal kingdom for 15 years. They knew every rule, every loophole, every way to make residents' lives miserable while staying technically within their rights. So I got smart. I started researching. First, I pulled the public records for every house in Sunset Meadows. There were 47 houses total, including mine. I researched the property values, the mortgage situations, the ownership histories. I looked up tax records, liens, foreclosure proceedings, anything that might give me an advantage. Then I studied the HOA itself. I got copies of the original covenant, all the bylaws, every amendment that had been passed over the years. I read through 15 years of board meeting minutes. I learned that according to the original rules, you needed to own at least 51% of the properties to call a special election. and dissolve the HOA. That meant I needed 24 houses. Including mine, I needed 23. More. It sounds impossible, right? But I had advantages that Mrs. Henderson and her board didn't know about. First, I'm a software engineer, and I had just sold an app one, developed to a major tech company for $2.8 million after taxes. Second, I'm single with no kids and very low expenses. And third, I was absolutely, completely, 100% committed to this plan. I started with the easy targets. There were 3 houses that were already empty and on the market. The real estate market was soft, and these houses had been sitting for months. I made cash offers on all 3, 10% below asking price, but with quick closings. 2 of the sellers accepted immediately, grateful to finally have buyers. The third tried to negotiate, but when I showed up with a cashier's check and offer to close in 2 weeks, they agreed. 4 houses down, 20 more to go. Next, I targeted the rentals. There were 7 houses in the neighborhood that were rental properties. I researched the landlords and found that 3 of them lived out of state and were probably tired of dealing with HOA complaints about their tenants. I sent them letters offering to buy their properties for fair market value, cash, no inspections, quick closing. 2 of them called me within a week. They were indeed tired of getting violation notices every time their tenants left a basketball in the driveway or failed to bring in their trash cans quickly enough. We closed on both properties within a month. 7 houses down, 17 to go. The hardest part was staying under the radar. Mrs. Henderson and her board were suspicious of all the recent sales, but since I was using an LLC I had created, they couldn't directly connect the purchases to me. As far as they knew, there was just a sudden interest in Sunset Meadows real estate. For the occupied houses, I had to be more creative. I started with the households I knew were struggling financially. There was the Johnson family, who had mentioned in passing that they were behind on their mortgage. The elderly Mr. Peterson, whose fixed income was being stretched thinner every year. The young couple in the corner house, who had just had twins and were talking about needing more space. I approached each of them carefully, privately. I explained that I was an investor, looking to buy properties in the neighborhood, and I could offer them excellent deals above market value, cash, and they could rent the house back from me at below market rates if they wanted to stay. For those who wanted to move anyway, it was perfect. For those who wanted to stay, they could eliminate their mortgage payments and reduce their monthly housing costs. The Johnsons jumped at the offer. They were 3 months behind on payments and facing foreclosure. I paid off their mortgage and gave them $50,000 cash to start fresh somewhere else. Mr. Peterson was interested in the rent-back option. His mortgage payment was $1,800 a month, but I offered to rent the house back to him for $1,200. He'd have $600 extra every month and no maintenance responsibilities. One by one, I made deals. Some people wanted to sell and move. Others took the rent-back option. A few turned me down, but not many. When you're offering above market prices with cash and flexible terms, most people at least consider it. The process took almost 18 months. I had to be patient, waiting for the right opportunities, the right conversations. I couldn't appear too eager, or people would get suspicious and prices would go up. During this time, the HOA kept being their awful selves. They actually helped my cause by continuing to terrorize residents with petty violations and ridiculous fines. Every time someone got a violation notice for something stupid, I casually mentioned that I'd heard there was an investor buying houses in the neighborhood for above-market prices. Mrs. Henderson and the board did try to stop the sales at one point. They attempted to invoke their right of first refusal clause, claiming the HOA could match any offer and buy properties themselves. But I had read the bylaws more carefully than they had. The right of first refusal only applied if the community was being converted to a different use, like condos or commercial property. Since all my purchases were keeping the houses as single-family residential, their clause didn't apply. They tried to pass new rules limiting rentals, but it was too late. I already owned most of the rental properties, and the new rules couldn't be applied retroactively. By month 16, I owned 21 houses. I was so close I could taste it. The 22nd house came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Henderson herself. She had been getting increasingly paranoid about all the changes in the neighborhood, and she decided she wanted out. She put her house on the market, and of course, I immediately made an offer through my LLC. The irony was beautiful. The woman who had made my life hell was unknowingly selling her house to me. House 23 was the hardest. There were only a few holdouts left, and they were the people who really loved the neighborhood and didn't want to sell at any price. I had to wait for the right opportunity. It came when the Martinez family, Bob Martinez, the former vice president with the measuring tape, had a family emergency. His mother in Florida needed full-time care, and they needed to move quickly. They put their house on the market on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, I had made an offer they couldn't refuse. 24 houses, 51% of the properties in Sunset Meadows. But I didn't stop there. Over the next 6 months, I managed to buy 3 more houses, giving me 27 total. I wanted to be absolutely certain I had control. Then came the fun part. According to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner could call for a special board election if they had a petition signed by owners representing at least 51% of the properties. Since I owned 27 properties, I technically had 57%. I printed out 27 copies of the petition, signed all of them, and submitted them to the HOA board on a Tuesday morning in March. Mrs. Henderson called me within an hour. She was furious. "This is ridiculous, David. You can't just buy up the neighborhood and take over the HOA. There must be rules against this." I had been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I've read all the rules very carefully. There's nothing in the bylaws that prevents a homeowner from owning multiple properties, and there's nothing that limits voting rights based on the number of properties owned. Each property gets 1 vote, and I own 27 properties. This is not what HOAs are supposed to be about." "You're absolutely right," I said. "HOAs are supposed to be about maintaining property values and creating a pleasant community for everyone. They're not supposed to be about petty tyrants measuring people's grass and fining them for having the wrong shade of black mailbox." The special election was held 3 weeks later. Since I controlled 27 votes out of 47, the outcome was never in doubt. I elected myself president, and I elected the tenants from 2 of my rental properties as vice president and secretary. The old board was completely voted out. My first official act as HOA president was to call an emergency board meeting. The agenda had 1 item: a vote to dissolve the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association. The vote was 27 in favor, 20 against. The HOA was officially dissolved. But I wasn't done yet. Over the next month, I implemented what I called the transition plan. For the homeowners who weren't my tenants, I sent letters explaining that all HOA rules were now void. All outstanding fines were forgiven, and they were free to paint their mailboxes any color they wanted. I also returned all the money in the HOA's reserve fund to the homeowners as a prorated refund based on how long they had been paying dues. For my tenants, I told them they could paint their houses any color they wanted, plant any gardens they liked, and park wherever was convenient. The only requirement was that they maintain their properties reasonably well, which was just basic being a good neighbor stuff. I kept most of the houses as rentals, but I sold a few back to families who wanted to buy them. In every case, I sold them for exactly what I had paid with no markup. I wasn't trying to make money on this. I was trying to make a point. The point was that communities work best when people treat each other with respect and common sense, not when petty dictators use technicalities to bully their neighbors. Mrs. Henderson moved to a new planned community across town. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to join their HOA board but was voted down. Apparently, word had spread about what happened in Sunset Meadows. Bob Martinez moved to Florida to be near his mother, but before he left, he actually came by to apologize. He said that being on the HOA board had brought out the worst in him, and he was embarrassed about how he had treated people. We ended up having a good conversation, and I genuinely wished him well. Susan Kim, the former secretary, stayed in the neighborhood. She rented a house from me for 2 years before buying it. She told me later that she had never realized how stressful it was to live under constant scrutiny until she was free from it. As for the neighborhood itself, it's actually nicer now than it ever was under the HOA. People take care of their properties because they want to, not because they're afraid of fines. Neighbors help each other instead of looking for violations to report. Kids can leave their bikes in the front yard without their parents getting violation notices. Property values have actually gone up since the HOA was dissolved. Turns out that most homebuyers prefer neighborhoods where they won't get fined for parking their car 6 inches in the wrong direction. I still live in my original house, the one where this whole saga began. My mailbox is still black, but now it's the shade of black I chose, not the one mandated by Mrs. Henderson. My grass is exactly the length I want it to be, and my garden hose is visible from the street, and nobody cares. The total cost of my revenge was about $1.4 million in property purchases, plus legal fees, plus the costs of managing rental properties. But considering I eliminated a system that was making 47 families miserable, and considering the rental income covers most of my costs, I consider it money well spent. Some people ask me if I regret spending so much money and time on what was essentially an elaborate revenge plot. The answer is no, not for a second. Sometimes bullies only understand one language: overwhelming force. Mrs. Henderson and her board thought they had all the power because they controlled the HOA. They forgot that real power comes from ownership, and ownership can be bought. The best part is that my solution was completely legal, completely within the rules they had established, and completely permanent. They can't undo what I did. They can't pass new rules to stop me. The HOA is gone forever, dissolved, according to its own bylaws. And the 20 families who are still my tenants, they love it. They have stable housing at below market rates, no HOA fees, and no petty rules to follow. Several of them have told me that they've never been happier in their homes. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. In fact, I've been contacted by people in other neighborhoods who are dealing with similar HOA nightmares. I've started consulting with them, helping them understand their options. Most of the time, there are ways to reform bad HOAs without buying out the entire neighborhood. But sometimes, when the system is completely broken and the people running it refuse to be reasonable, you need to take drastic action. The lesson here isn't that everyone should go out and buy their entire neighborhood. The lesson is that bullies, even officially sanctioned ones, can be stopped if you're creative, determined, and willing to fight back within their own system. Mrs. Henderson thought she had me trapped. She thought that homeowners had no choice but to put up with whatever arbitrary rules the HOA wanted to impose. She was wrong. I had a choice. I chose to fight back, and I won. Today, Sunset Meadows is everything a neighborhood should be. A place where people enjoy living, where neighbors look out for each other, and where you don't have to worry about being fined for the color of your mailbox. Considering the rental income covers most of my costs, I consider it money well spent. Some people ask me if I regret spending so much money and time on what was essentially an elaborate revenge plot. The answer is no, not for a second. Sometimes bullies only understand one language: overwhelming force. Mrs. Henderson and her board thought they had all the power because they controlled the HOA. They forgot that real power comes from ownership, and ownership can be bought. The best part is that my solution was completely legal, completely within the rules they had established, and completely permanent. They can't undo what I did. They can't pass new rules to stop me. The HOA is gone forever, dissolved, according to its own bylaws. And the 20 families who are still my tenants, they love it. They have stable housing at below market rates, no HOA fees, and no petty rules to follow. Several of them have told me that they've never been happier in their homes. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. In fact, I've been contacted by people in other neighborhoods who are dealing with similar HOA nightmares. I've started consulting with them, helping them understand their options. Most of the time, there are ways to reform bad HOAs without buying out the entire neighborhood. But sometimes, when the system is completely broken and the people running it refuse to be reasonable, you need to take drastic action. The lesson here isn't that everyone should go out and buy their entire neighborhood. The lesson is that bullies, even officially sanctioned ones, can be stopped if you're creative, determined, and willing to fight back within their own system. Mrs. Henderson thought she had me trapped. She thought that homeowners had no choice but to put up with whatever arbitrary rules the HOA wanted to impose. She was wrong. I had a choice. I chose to fight back, and I won. Today, Sunset Meadows is everything a neighborhood should be. A place where people enjoy living, where neighbors look out for each other, and where you don't have to worry about being fined for the color of your mailbox. And Mrs. Henderson? She's probably somewhere right now measuring someone else's grass and complaining about unauthorized seasonal decorations. But that's their problem now, not mine.